A summer day, Tokyo, July 2000. A city of millions, shining with advertising lights and hiding in its alleys what will never make it onto postcards with views of Japan. Here, a few blocks from the business center, a foreigner named Lucy Blackman, young, beautiful, full of plans for the future, will step into the back door of her destiny, and no one will see her alive again. It was a story that began as a trip and a part-time job, but turned into an international tragedy. A story where, at the intersection of cultures, laws, and human weaknesses, a nightmare was born, stretching out for months of searches, investigations, and lawsuits. Lucy came to Japan from Great Britain, inspired by stories about working in Tokyo clubs. There, foreign women who spoke English could earn good money by communicating with wealthy Japanese, without intimate obligations, but with the observance of a strict unspoken code. For many, it was a chance to see the world, to escape the routine, to save for the future. For Lucy, it was also a financial necessity. Debts, plans, a desire to change her life. On the evening of July 1st, 2000, she went to a date, a private meeting with one of the club's clients. It was a man who introduced himself as a wealthy businessman. He promised a trip out of town, dinner by the sea, new experiences. Lucy agreed, leaving her friend information about who she was going with and where. But after this meeting, she disappeared. At first, the disappearance seemed strange, but not extraordinary. In a metropolis where people leave and return every day, the police were slow to react. But those close to her knew. Lucy would not have disappeared without a reason. Her father, Tim Blackman, immediately began his own investigation, challenging not only the criminal, but also the Japanese system, unhurried and closed to foreigners. Days turned into weeks. There was little information. Theories multiplied, but none provided a solid foundation. The police called witnesses, checked phones, analyzed video recordings, but Tokyo does not like to give away its secrets. The situation was complicated by cultural barriers. Lucy's work in a hostess bar seemed dubious to the Japanese investigators, which, in their eyes, explained her disappearance. This caused unspoken condemnation and an implicit slowdown in the case. For the British family, everything looked different. Their daughter was a victim of a crime, and every minute of delay could cost her life. Meanwhile, suspicions began to concentrate around one name: Joe Obara, a Japanese millionaire known for his affairs with foreign women. His reputation was contradictory, generous and charming in public, but secretive and withdrawn in private. Witnesses told of strange cases of losing consciousness during meetings with him, of memory lapses after drinking wine. But all this remained at the level of rumors. The investigation was stalled. The British press picked up the story, turning Lucy's disappearance into international news. The pressure on the Japanese authorities increased, but there were still no answers. And only in February 2001, after 7 long months, the tragic denouement came from the southern coast. In a coastal cave about 50 kilometers from Tokyo, human remains were discovered. The setting of the find indicated careful preparation. The body was dismembered and placed in a container. An examination confirmed the worst. It was Lucy Blackman. For the family, a new stage of horror began. Now they knew that she was dead, but did not know the whole truth about her last hours. For the investigation, this was confirmation of murder, but not an automatic guarantee of a conviction. For the press, it became a sensation, revealing the dark side of Japan, where wealth and status can protect even those suspected of the most heinous crimes. Joe Obara was born in Japan to a wealthy Korean immigrant family. From childhood, he knew that wealth opens doors that remain closed to most. But along with this, a sense of alienation grew. He was not a full-fledged Japanese in the eyes of society, which meant that he filled the inner emptiness with power, money, and control over others. Outwardly, Obara embodied the image of an ideal gentleman: good clothes, expensive cars, the ability to maintain a conversation in several languages. He knew how to seem charming, but this charm was a tool carefully honed over the years. Behind closed doors, away from prying eyes, another face appeared. Cold, calculating, devoid of empathy. Obra collected women the way others collect antiques, but for him they were not individuals. Each was an object, a source of short-term satisfaction that could be used and then thrown away. His method was almost always the same: invite the victim on a date, treat them to wine or a cocktail containing powerful sleeping pills, and then photograph and film the unconscious body for hours or days. Investigators would later find hundreds of hours of video recordings of dozens of women, Japanese and foreign. Most of them probably never knew what happened to them. Some died, like Lucy. But what is most striking is how long he was able to act with impunity. The first complaints against him were filed back in the 1990s. Women reported strange memory loss, personal belongings disappearing, injuries they could not explain. But the police found no evidence, or more likely, did not want to look for it. Japanese culture has a deep-rooted reluctance to air dirty laundry in public. Sexual crimes, especially if the victim is a woman, are often not a priority for the investigation. This is even more so if the victims are club workers or foreigners. Their lives are considered risky and supposedly explain what happened. Obara understood these weaknesses of the system very well. He was rich, he had connections, and his victims were almost always in a vulnerable position. They did not go to the police because they did not believe that they would be believed. And those who did faced a cold wall of bureaucracy. Psychologists who studied his behavior note a rare combination of narcissism, sexual sadism, and complete emotional detachment. For Obara, the victim ceased to be a person even before he met her. She was part of a scenario that he played out in his head over and over again. He was attracted not only by the control itself, but also by the knowledge that he was able to break the law while remaining untouchable. In Lucy's case, this sense of permissiveness was at its most extreme. She was a foreigner, new to Japan, with no large circle of acquaintances or stable support. For Obara, this meant that the risk was minimal. He had invited her, following a well-established pattern, confident that the disappearance would remain one of those stories that dissolves in the noise of Tokyo. But this time, he was wrong. The investigation into Lucy Blackman's death has become one of the most high-profile cases in modern Japanese criminal history. But from the start, it seemed as if it too would disappear into the routine of unsolved cases. The first thing that hampered the investigation was the lack of a body. Lucy's friends and her father, Tim Blackman, put pressure on the police from the very first days, demanding active action. They gave interviews, wrote letters to the British Embassy, and created petitions. But in the first months, the police acted sluggishly. There were no witnesses, no evidence, and Lucy herself worked in a field that Japanese law enforcement traditionally considered problematic and unworthy of priority attention. The turning point came when Joe Obara came into the investigation's field of vision. This was not because of direct evidence in Lucy's case, but thanks to another woman, Australian Karen, who survived the attack. She said that after meeting him, she lost consciousness and woke up at home, not remembering what happened. The police decided to check on Obara, and a series of searches began in his apartment. What they found shocked even experienced investigators. Hundreds of tapes on shelves and in closets. On the videos were dozens of women, most of whom were unconscious. The dates on the recordings went back to the 1980s. The victims included Japanese and foreign women, students, waitresses, girls from clubs. Each video was carefully labeled and numbered, but Lucy was not among these materials. Without her image on the tapes, without an obvious scene of the crime, the prosecution of her case was shaky. In the Japanese justice system, it is important that charges be supported by direct evidence, and circumstantial evidence is often insufficient. Obara found himself in a unique position. He could be tried for other incidents, but proving Lucy's murder was extremely difficult. Only 7 months after the girl disappeared did a breakthrough occur. Partially decomposed remains were found on the coast south of Tokyo. The skull was damaged, and the body was dismembered and hidden in a concrete box buried deep in the forest. The teeth confirmed that it was Lucy. Experts determined that she died from suffocation, and that the injuries were inflicted later. But even this did not provide a 100% basis for charging O'Bara with murder. He denied any involvement, claiming that he had never met Lucy. The lawyers argued that the evidence found only pointed to an indirect acquaintance, and the burial site could not be directly linked to the accused. The trial began in 2003 and lasted almost 4 years. The prosecution presented materials on numerous episodes of sexual violence, including cases with other foreign women. But the charge of Lucy's murder was in question. In 2007, the court announced the verdict. Joe O'Bara was found guilty of a series of rapes and the death of another woman, Karatana T., but acquitted of the murder of Lucy. This came as a shock to both the family and the British public. It seemed that justice had not been served. Only several years later, after appeals, did the Supreme Court of Japan overturn the acquittal on this episode. In 2008, O'Bara was sentenced to life imprisonment, but even this sentence left a feeling of bitterness. He was punished not so much for the murder of Lucy, but for a whole range of other crimes that the system allowed him to commit for decades. Sometimes it feels like too many years have passed for the pain to be as sharp, but it's still there. In the kitchen, where a cup sits on the table, untouched. In the phone, where Lucy's number is still saved, even though there's nowhere to call. For the family, time stood still that day. Everything else is like another life. They learn to go to work, answer neighbors' questions, even laugh sometimes. But underneath it all, there's always the same feeling, that the world goes on without her, and that's wrong. In Japan, right off the coast where her remains were found, the sea roars just as it did then. The waves crash against the rocks, and if you stand there long enough, it seems like it's trying to say something. There's no monument. People walk past, not knowing that beneath their feet is the place where a life ended. The trial left behind more questions than answers. Papers, protocols, decisions. None of this gives a sense of justice. He survived, he heard his sentence, but the family never heard the only word that could have changed anything. Guilty of her death. Many still argue, is he a monster or just a man who grew up in a system where violence is hidden behind closed doors? For his family, this is not an argument. For them, he is the one who took Lucy. For the law, he is a figure that can only be described through wording and footnotes. There is emptiness left. It is in the albums where the photos end on the same page. In the chair by the window where she liked to sit. Now it is just a warehouse of unnecessary things. There is emptiness even in conversation. Her name is spoken in a whisper, as if they are afraid to disturb something too fragile. You can endlessly speculate, what if she had chosen a different path, a different job, a different day to leave the house? What if someone had noticed the oddities earlier? What if the services worked differently? But history is not rewritten. Her life is not just one family's tragedy, it is a warning to everyone else. Someone else's misfortune can become yours if you turn away. And behind every facade, behind every polite smile, there may be something that no one dares to say out loud. And when silence covers everything, only this feeling remains. That the story was finished too late. It was case number 99. History that should not be repeated, but if we remain silent, it will definitely be repeated.